Welcome! In this series of short videos, we will give an introduction to those who have never used PowerBasic before, or even considered taking up programming. Today we will look at the task of documentation. So why would anyone want to do documentation? When asked, most programmers would say that they want to work on cutting-edge applications, pushing back the boundaries of what programs and computers can actually do. Many don't like doing documentation and would rather be coding. Documentation is often the first casualty of development. Many projects which are being run with tight timescales and need to complete the application or system on time can skimp on the documentation. However, this is a false economy, as good documentation makes an application or system more maintainable. When problems occur, and trust me, eventually there will be issues that do need to be fixed, or at least investigated, then some degree of documentation does help whoever has to pick up the pieces and correct or explain the problem. So what kinds of documentation are there? Code-based. Sensible naming of variables, functions, subroutines, classes, methods and properties can make code easier to read and understand. Code adjacent. Putting comments at strategic points inside your source files will give any developer more idea of what the code is supposed to be doing and why. External documents. System or application flowcharts, documents describing the purpose and data flows are always useful for an easy to understand overview of the system or application. Web-based. Making your technical documentation accessible to developers and operational use documents accessible to users on a website. Looking at code-based documentation. Let's take this piece of code as an example. We have here a small function called doStuff. The function has a single numeric parameter. However, the name of the function doesn't really tell us much about what this function is going to do. The parameter being passed doesn't tell us the purpose of the function. The function contains a for next loop for r equals 1 to the upper bounding of the variable c. Since we're using the ubound command, we know that C must be an array. But it's not at all obvious what the purpose of that array is, or even the type of the array. We can see from the following line that we're setting one element of that array for each iteration of the loop to the value passed in on the parameters. So the array must be numeric. However, if we look at a slightly different version of that function, where the function has been named more sensibly, we can see the purpose of the function in the name of the array. Its purpose is to initialize days. It takes an initial value as the parameter, and it's running round a loop as before. In this case, the name of the array it's populating is called dayValues. So we can see we have a dayValues array which has been populated with an initial value for each element of that array. For code adjacent, where we're putting some comments into the function, we can document even further. Now in our comments we have that it's an initialization routine to populate the dayValues array, to set the initial value of each of the 7 days. So this gives you more information on the purpose of the function. We can see in code what the function is actually doing, but now we've got more view of the bigger picture. These additional comments add yet more clarity to the purpose of the function. External documents. These can come in many forms, from simple notepad files to multi-page Word or equivalent documents, containing diagrams, flowcharts, and perhaps extensive descriptions. There may be documentation on the initial requirements, which will be needed if you have an independent testing team. After all, you can't truly test something unless you have something to test it against. some of your applications will not be client-facing. These will be the scheduled automatic processing applications that are used for heavy-duty back-end processing. Documentation on these should probably cover what computer or server does the application run on, what schedules or triggers the run of the application, what are its inputs and outputs, what processing does it carry out, and what processing logs does it produce and where can they be found. Web-based. HTML help files either on the web, intranet, or within a traditional help file sitting beside the executable. These are all good ways to reach both your operational users and developers alike. One of the major purposes of such user-facing documentation is to minimize the number of queries that users will attempt to raise with you, and the number of staff needed to action such queries. The more user-facing documentation you have, the less queries they will raise. So what documentation can you do before starting coding? Requirements. What have we been asked to actually deliver? Design and brainstorming. What will it do? And how? Working out how we can create something that will meet the requirements. There are many different applications you can use to do brainstorming. I'm going to show an application here which I use quite often. It's called Knowledge Base Builder. I'll put links in the description below where you can obtain it. This application is a mind mapping application amongst other things. It makes it easy to throw together some ideas as a discussion document, so you can basically work out the high-level picture of how your system or application is going to hang together. There's a lot of extra functionality built into this application, from rotating your diagrams automatically to going into an entire 3D mode, which in some cases may be quite useful. At the birth of a new application or system, the users may have a good idea of what they actually want, but they may not know how to achieve it because they're not developers. Developers, on the other hand, may have a very good idea of how to do things, but they're not familiar with the processes the users normally follow on a day-to-day basis. Therefore, there will have to be a certain amount of brainstorming at the beginning to get both sides together and to map out how a system or application is actually going to work. I found that this kind of brainstorming is very useful to do right at the beginning. It allows you to establish your requirement. What is the application or system going to be doing? And you should always refer back to this requirement when it comes time to do user testing or system testing. Because if your application or system does not meet the requirement, then you will have failed in the development. Much has been said about working in an agile manner. Agile development practices are quite common now. However, agile processes do not mean that you make it up as you go along. There has to be some planning. The more complex the system you're doing, the more you have to plan. And it's important for users to give you all the information as early as they can, because all the information you have will be used by you, the developer, to structure the whole system or the application. If they leave out some key piece of information, then you may not have a design that can cope with this change later. So laying out your design in a mind mapping tool at the beginning is a very good approach. And all of this should be done before you write the very first line of code. Hopefully you'll find this guidance on documentation useful when you're developing your applications. But that's it for today. Thank you for watching.